So there's been a lot of hype around the Strymon Cloudburst that was just recently released. And for the past year or so, I've been rocking the Walrus R1. I do a lot of worship style stuff. So I use this primarily as my go-to like ambient reverb thing. And with the Cloudburst kind of specializing in that area, I was curious as to how the two compared. So I thought I'd make a video for anyone else that is curious about these two pedals. And what I'm going to do is run through a few different samples of tones. I'm not going to go through every single option in each pedal. I think there's other videos that do that very well and can do it better than me. But like I said, what I want to do is just run through a few different sounds that I might use in the context of what I play, and hopefully that will give you some ideas on how these two pedals can fit into your rig. So I'm going to start off with the Walrus R1, and right now I'm on the BFR mode, which is like the go-to ambient reverb in this pedal. And I do have an Optimus on the left side, which is like a Klon style overdrive. All right, and I'm going to switch over to the Cloudburst. I'm going to turn this up just a little bit to match closer to what the R1 is doing. So some initial thoughts on these two pedals is there is a difference between the two, and there's definitely a difference in the high end in this kind of a situation. Now, the Cloudburst does have a tone knob where you can darken the sound a little bit. And both of these pedals, when you turn up the tone knob on the Cloudburst, you do get like an extra bit of shimmeriness on the top end, and the same goes for the R1. The difference here with the R1 is that you do have this switch which will let you control the low end and the high end individually. So I'm going to switch over to the high end, and I'm going to push this up just a little bit. And you'll see that there's this kind of extra shimmery thing happening. So to me, that sound, that extra shimmery sound, is a little bit more prominent on the R1, but that's not to say that it isn't in the Cloudburst. So very similar sounds in both of these pedals, and I'm going to dial up the Cloudburst just a little bit more. And I'm going to do the same thing for the R1. I'm going to dial this up just a little bit. So very, very similar sounds, and the differences that you might be hearing in this isolated example, honestly, in a bigger band mix, especially in the context of a church band, where you have an organ, you have keyboards, you have synths, you have 8, 12 vocalists, I'm going to be honest and say that the differences between these two pedals start to get pretty minimal. That's not to say that they aren't there. And I mean, for you personally, maybe you can not just hear the difference, but you might be able to also feel the difference, and feel is definitely a big part of the equation here. But for my ears, the two big reverb sounds are really, really similar. Something that I will note, though, is the R1 seems to get out of hand in terms of its reverb sound a little bit more. So I'm going to dial this up even more. And I'm going to throw on the right side of the Optimist, which is like a Timmy style drive, just so we can get some more grittiness to the sound. So you can see that both pedals can definitely start to get out of hand. And that sound right there is probably not a sound that I would use, but I did it in order to demonstrate, and hopefully this comes across on YouTube. For me, for what I found is the Cloudburst stays a little bit more tidy once you start to dial in a ton of reverb. It it stays a little bit tighter, and you can hear the transients better on the notes. So again, the R1 does seem to get a little bit more out of hand. There does seem to be like this extra bit of grittiness to the R1, and a little bit more of a, I want to say, a digital sound to the Cloudburst, but I know that has a negative connotation. So I don't take that to mean digital in like a bad way. The Cloudburst just sounds cleaner. It sounds tighter, as I said, on the higher reverb settings than the R1 does. Now, I would say that neither of those sounds are bad necessarily. They're just different. I could honestly see myself using both of these pedals depending on the context. Where if I'm maybe doing a lead line where I do want a bunch of reverb and I have a lot of drive on, maybe I do want that little bit of a cleaner sound, something a little bit tighter, so that way all of the transients and the pick attack can be heard. Whereas maybe if I'm doing something a little bit more subtle, I kind of do want that grittiness that's coming from the R1. So again, just different sounds in different situations. So let's leave the reverb, the big ambient stuff for a second, because again, I do feel like these two pedals are very, very similar in terms of that big ambient reverb sound. But let's explore something a little bit different here. Let's go to just like a straight up, much more tidy, much more reserved reverb sound. And just for context, I'm back to only using the clon here. So the way that I use this reverb here, and this particular setting that I have saved, is a hall sound. And I have it just dialed in enough to give me a little bit of a pad when I'm playing mostly clean stuff, funk stuff, gospel stuff. And that's so my clean tone isn't just completely sterile. There's a little bit of something there. Again, you can hear it much more clearly in this isolated context. In the context of a bigger band, this preset I have here is even more reserved, to where sometimes you can't even really hear it. It's just giving a little bit of something extra. Now, with the Cloudburst, you can do something really, really similar. So you can see we've gone from like a really big, luscious reverb to something way more controlled. Now, if you're listening to the trail of how these end, the decay on the Cloudburst is much tighter. And the reason for that is that these two reverbs are actually doing a different thing. The Cloudburst is giving you more of a, you're playing in a medium-sized room, whereas the R1 is giving you more the experience of, well, what it's listed here, you're playing in a big hall. So that decay is a little bit different. So again, if I was using the Cloudburst and I just wanted a little something sitting behind, some clean playing, some funk lines. That's the sound that I would use. I think both of these pedals do that fairly well. This one is a little bit different from the big ambient reverb comparison that we did. Again, in that the Cloudburst is giving you more of a medium-sized, you're in the room with an amp kind of a sound, and then the R1 is giving you more of a hall type sound. And truth be told, if you're looking for that amp in a room type sound, the R1 just can't do it. It's not one of the settings here. You do have access to a spring, a plate, a hall. Those are going to be your basic reverbs. But like an amp in the room type sound, the R1 just doesn't do it. Okay, so the final thing that I want to go over here is the alternative modes, what I'm calling the alternative experimental, I guess you could say, reverb sounds. And this is really the area that is going to greatly differentiate the two pedals and perhaps influence which direction you go. Now, in terms of experimental reverbs, what we have on the R1 is a refract mode and an air mode. And if you're wanting something a little bit like glitchier, you can go with the refract. So you can kind of hear on this refract mode, there's like this modulated sound that can be really nice. And I'm going to go over now to the air mode. And you can hear that there is like this kind of airy, washy sound that's happening in the background. Truth be told, I don't use these two modes very often for the kind of music that I play. I mean, I could probably count on one hand the number of times that I've used them, but it might be different for you and what you do. Maybe these two modes are going to be your go-to modes. And again, there's like a ton of options in here of how you can change the way that these two modes react and what they do. Again, I think there's other videos that go a little bit more in depth into the different possibilities that you can have going on with those two modes and with these switches here. But let me jump over to the Cloudburst, and I'm going to hit that switch there. I'm going to up this just a little bit. So you can see just a completely different sound. This is more of like a synth style sound. And if you're interested in really how to use that mode, I would say check out some other YouTube videos, maybe even Chords of Orion. He goes through some really cool ways to use that mode. But we can dial this up even more to get more of a synth like choral style sound. So this sound that's in the Cloudburst, you are just not going to get on the R1. There's no mode on here that will get you an approximation of that sound. And vice versa, if you want that refract mode or that air mode, you're not going to get it here in the Cloudburst. So those are the three scenarios that I wanted to go through. I will just quickly mention some features that are similar between the two. On the R1, you do have some nice quality of life things where you can quickly switch between 3 different presets that you set. You can do presets on the Cloudburst, but in order to really get the most out of the presets, you need to have an external switcher, which will switch between the different presets, or you can have a MIDI controller, and you can set that however you want. Speaking of MIDI, the R1, big selling point about the R1 is that it also comes with MIDI. And between these two pedals, I mean, you can set just about every parameter that you would want. You can have expression pedals. You can do all kinds of crazy stuff with MIDI and with some external switches. But I do think it is a nice quality of life thing that the R1 has a very clear designation of what preset you're on, whereas the Cloudburst doesn't really have anything like that. There's really no way to tell just from the pedal itself what preset you're on. So it becomes even more of a necessity, I think, if you're going to do presets, to have some kind of external switcher, or some kind of very clearly designated MIDI controller. Besides that, I mean, like I said, there's other videos that go more in depth into the nitty gritty details of what each of these pedals can do. So what is this going to come down to? What are my final thoughts on which pedal you might want to buy? Well, I think that choice becomes really easy when you start to think about what are you looking for in terms of sounds. Do you really want that synthy choral sound? Well, then you've got to go with the Cloudburst. Or do you want that refractor air mode? Then you've got to go with the R1. If you're just looking for a nice ambient reverb pedal with no extra frills, you just want that big, luscious ambient sound. Honestly, either one of these pedals can do it really well. And at that point, it might come down to the price. You can pick up an R1 used, whereas the Cloudburst, at least at the time of this video, it's brand new, so you can't really get it used. And then there also might be some functionality things for you to take into mind. Again, having presets readily available that you can see which preset you're on without any external switcher, without anything MIDI happening, that might be worth the price of admission for you if you're just trying to keep things simple. If you're looking for kind of like a do-it-all, one and done style pedal that comes in a compact format, where you can have like a basic reverb and then a big ambient reverb, again, I think either one of these pedals are going to serve you really, really well. That might come down to the basic reverb sound. Again, if you like the amp in a room style reverb, where you just want a little bit just to give yourself some pad, then you've got to go with the Cloudburst. However, if you are happy to use like a hall style or a plate or a spring as just your basic underlying, I just want a little bit of something extra on my clean tone, and you're not a big fan of like the in the room sound, then you've got to go with the R1. So I think that's going to wrap it up for this video. Again, hopefully this is going to be helpful to someone in trying to decide which one to go with. What am I going to end up with after some extensive testing? Like, honestly, I think I could see myself using both, as I mentioned earlier, for different applications. For the time being, though, because I've already got this R1 integrated into my board, I've got all kinds of MIDI capability programmed. Just for the time being, I'm probably going to stick with the R1. Then maybe at some point, once I upgrade my board to something a little bit bigger, I might pick this Cloudburst up again and throw it on there, just to give myself some more options and flexibility. All right, well, that wraps it up for me. Thanks, everyone, and have a great day.